Scene start announcer, voice intro. Urgent, high energy. Cable news click style, visual, fast-paced, high-contrast turn 5 light radar heat maps overlaying the Shenzhen skyline. Recklessly shaky footage of water dropping from high-rise ceilings, then a dramatic jump cut to the glowing neon of luxury sedans being driven straight into mega-tower elevators. Narrator. Imagine a world where you never have to use a public parking garage again. Imagine driving your custom, multi-million yuan hypercar straight off the bustling avenues of Shenzhen's hyper-luxury coastal district, rolling directly into a high-speed, patented robotic elevator, and riding up 60 stories alongside your vehicle, stepping out straight into your living room, 200 meters above the South China Sea. Visual, text flash on screen, 6 million thousand architectural marvel. This isn't a blueprint. This is the Imperial Lotus Design Tower in Shenzhen. 132 ultra-exclusive residential units. Buyers paid as much as 230 million yuan each to secure their piece of the sky. 22 of them are documented billionaires, tech tycoons, and manufacturing magnates. The developer, Longhao Real Estate Group, cleared an estimated 6 billion yuan on the entire sellout. It was hailed as the absolute pinnacle of southern China's engineering dominance. But there was just one microscopic detail that didn't make it into the glossy, gold-embossed sales brochure. Visual. Sound effect. Loud heartbeat drop. Visual changes to a close-up of an ultra-thin crack propagating through polished marble floors. From the very day the ribbon was cut, this multi-billion yuan monument to wealth has been sinking straight into the delta mud beneath it. Now, here is what makes this structural nightmare completely impossible for local authorities to explain away. This wasn't some rushed, cut-corner suburban residential block that skimped on its foundation to beat a regulatory deadline. If anything, it is the exact opposite. When Longhao Real Estate Group broke ground along the prestigious waterfront, they brought in the heavy armor. They drilled 149 massive friction piles deep into the earth. Each single pile measured nearly 1 meter across. Each one reached a staggering 45 meters down into the subterranean strata. Then, they capped the entire forest of steel and rebar with a monolithic concrete mat foundation that swallowed over 8,400 cubic meters of high-grade concrete. One of the largest single-pour residential foundations the Pearl River Delta had ever witnessed. Visual. Diagram showing a giant table with 149 legs sitting on a layer of spawn. The entire 60-story tower was engineered to rest on that colossal mat like a massive steel table sitting on a single impenetrable slab. The geotechnical engineering wasn't an afterthought here. It was the core marketing pitch. The structural integrity was supposed to be as bulletproof as the luxury car brand stamped on the front gates. And yet, the tower is riding the elevator down anyway. The entire proposition of the Imperial Lotus Design Tower was built on raw, unadulterated spectacle. The automated car lift system, which marketing executives christened the Lotus Vader, the private in-unit sky garages. The ironclad promise of absolute privacy where a billionaire could go from the street to their penthouse sofa without ever touching a public pavement or encountering a paparazzi lens. That is the engineering theater that justified prices in the stratospheric multi-million-dollar range, but the far less glamorous engineering, the unglamorous, brutal reality buried 45 meters below the basement level, was the part that actually had to hold the line for the next 100 years. To understand exactly how this multi-billion yuan bet went completely sideways, you have to strip away the Italian marble, silence the roar of the V12 engines in the sky, and look at the unstable, shifting foundation that all of this extreme luxury is actually standing on. Scene end. Scene start narrator voice measured. Data driven. High insight energy. Visual. Graphic overlay showing the geological cross-section of the Shenzhen Bay waterfront. Labels pop up in rapid succession. Silt, peat, porous limestone water table. The satellite radar timeline slide is from 2016 to 2023. Narrator. The glittering skyline of Shenzhen's coastal districts is a masterclass in architectural illusion. To the casual investor, these towers look like permanent monuments of steel and glass anchored to the bedrock of a rising superpower. The reality under the pavement tells a completely different story. The Imperial Lotus Design Tower sits on reclaimed coastal land, a thin artificial crust of sand and silt jammed between the river delta and the open bay. Underneath this multi-billion yuan strip of real estate, there is absolutely no solid bedrock. Instead, engineers are forced to build on a treacherous geological layer cake of loose marine sand, unstable river silt, highly compressible peat, and a deeply fractured, porous limestone formation for a 60-story megastructure weighing hundreds of thousands of metric tons. That specific combination of soil behaves less like solid earth and more like a waterlogged sponge. Visual. Animated X-planar showing sinking force, F and crushing peat layers. Text on screen. The mechanics of creep. When you stack a massive concrete monolith, complete with 3 automated vehicle shafts and 132 armored skygurges, onto this terrain, the ground answers back. It happens slowly, silently, over years. Through a destructive physical phenomenon known to structural engineers as soil creep, the loose sandy layers trapped inside the porous limestone formations compact under the immense dead weight of the tower and the relentless, high-frequency vibrations of surrounding construction. Step by step, millisecond by millisecond, the building rides that compacting soil straight down, and from there, the subterranean fluid dynamics make it completely unpredictable. Visual, data spread Shetmock-up labeled, Municipal Housing Bureau. Geotechnical logs. Groundwater moves through these porous underground channels with the daily push and pull of the coastal tides, quietly rearranging sand grains 40 meters below the surface, day after day, week after week. When developers dig deep basement levels for these mega projects and pump out millions of gallons of water to keep the construction dry, they inadvertently accelerate the entire process, because this subsurface chaos varies wildly from 1 square meter to the next. 2 luxury high-rises, built just a few hundred meters apart, with identical heights, identical concrete volumes, and identical foundation designs, can settle at completely different rates. The mathematical models used by design institutes to predict this settlement are, to put it very kindly, working with a terrifying margin of uncertainty. It means a foundation system that looks absolutely flawless on a CAD program inside a Beijing design bureau can still wind up sitting on ground that simply refuses to behave the way the calculations assumes to. You would think that this level of geological uncertainty would slow the breakneck pace of construction down. It didn't. Visual. Time-lapse of the district climbing out of the mud from 2005 to 2025. Modals to mega towers. Over the past 2 decades, the Municipal Construction Commission watched as the waterfront traded low-rise industrial docks and prawn farms for an unbroken wall of branded glass super-tall towers. Longhao, Jinmao, China Vanke, and Evergrande-style premium blocks were packed tighter and tighter onto a narrow coastal strip. And as that multi-billion yuan real estate boom accelerated, the confidential geotechnical engineering reports filed with the local housing bureau kept highlighting the exact same uncomfortable truth. Engineers were systematically underestimating exactly how much these megastructures would settle. An independent data leak from a regional design institute revealed that several landmark luxury towers sank 2 to 3 times more than their early structural blueprints predicted. Even as engineers drilled deeper, pushing friction piles down to depths equivalent to a 20-story building turned completely on its end. The post-construction monitoring reports still came back describing the settlement as significantly more than anticipated. The red flags were explicitly detailed in the municipal paperwork. The skyline kept climbing anyway. Local bureaus kept stamping fresh approvals for towers pushing into the 300-meter and 400-meter range, determined to maximize the tax and land revenue of every single square meter of waterfront, which brings us directly to the definitive scientific study that finally put hard, unassailable numbers on the entire disaster. Visual. Cut to the logo of the Earth and Space Science Journal, then a radar Sat-2 graphic depaying from orbit in 2024. A dedicated research team at a top-tier southern China university published a groundbreaking paper that did something nobody had ever attempted at this scale across the delta. They utilized spaceborne satellite radar, a cutting-edge remote sensing technique known as INSAR, interferometric synthetic aperture radar. This technology bounces high-frequency radar signals off the roofs and balconies of buildings from low Earth orbit, comparing the exact return times over a span of years. It is precise enough to capture structural movements smaller than the width of a single human finger. With this orbital data, the researchers meticulously monitored the high-rises along a 20-kilometer stretch of the coastal development zone, tracking structural displacement from 2016 all the way through late 2023. What they discovered sent shockwaves through the engineering community. 35 premier coastal high-rises were actively sinking into the delta. Most had dropped somewhere between 20 and 80 millimeters. But the buildings sitting at the absolute top of that hazard list, showing nearly 80 millimeters of total downward movement, a little over 3 full inches of structural subsidence, was the Imperial Lotus Design Tower, visual, text flash, 80 millimeter subsidence. Trekit lock on the Lotus Tower logo. Here is the precise engineering detail that should have halted every sales transaction in the district. About half of these actively sinking luxury towers were completed after 2014. Furthermore, the preliminary satellite data suggested that nearly 70% of the high-rises in the northern and central sectors of the district were still actively moving downward. That matters immensely because the standard, fundamental assumption taught in every civil engineering classroom across China is that a high-rise undergoes initial settlement during its construction phase, stabilizes within 18 months of completion, and then completely stops. These elite towers were not stabilizing. Years after the last state-owned cement truck had left the site, and years after the billionaires moved their luxury sports cars into the sky, the buildings were still going down. Now, 80 millimeters over 7 years might not sound catastrophic to a layman. On its own, if that downward movement was spread perfectly evenly across every square meter of the foundation mat, it wouldn't be an immediate crisis. But that uniform number isn't what keeps structural inspectors awake at night. Visual 3D model of a high-rise basement cracking due to uneven loading. Diagram labels, total settlement, vs differential settlement. There are two completely distinct types of structural settlement. Total settlement is how far the entire building drops vertically. Differential settlement is how differently its various structural components sink relative to one another. And it is the second one that tears a mega structure apart. Remember those 149 drilled friction piles, each reaching down into slightly different, unpredictable pockets of silt and porous limestone? If the waterlogged sand under the northern corner of the Imperial Lotus Tower creeps and compresses faster than the sand under the southern corner, the reinforced concrete columns and thick floor slabs start shifting and twisting relative to each other. The building does not drop straight down like its patented luxury car elevator. It tilts, it twists, it strains violently against its own internal steel skeleton. The university study tracked individual rooftop edges and balcony corners as direct stand-ins for structural distortion. The resulting mathematical vectors proved that specific sections of these individual luxury towers were dropping significantly faster than others. In everyday residential terms, that translates to heavy penthouse doors that suddenly won't close right, high-pressure water pipes cracking behind expensive drywall, warped hardwood floors, and an astronomical structural maintenance bill that lands squarely on the building's wealthy homeowners committee. The researchers were highly cautious, stating that orbital satellite data alone cannot legally declare a megastructure unsafe, and that is a fair scientific boundary. But they were just as explicit that uneven, differential movement continuing year after year is a structural anomaly you absolutely cannot wave off when dealing with a 60-story tower packed with human lives and millions of tons of loaded concrete. For the building's upscale homeowners this isn't an academic debate. It is the immediate, terrifying financial difference between a routine property management budget and an emergency, multi-million yuan special structural assessment, divided up among ultra-wealthy owners who were completely left in the dark about the unstable soil conditions when they signed their luxury purchase contracts. Scene end. Scene start. Narrator voice. Urgent. expose style, drumming up the real estate and site visual. Map of coastal China high-rise zones glowing red. Quick jump cuts to well-known skyscraper incidents across the nation. The Shanghai Tower ground cracks. The Tianjin Golden Finance 117 desolation. The Shanghai Tower evacuations narrator. If you pull back from the exclusive gates of the Imperial Lotus Design Tower and look at the broader landscape, this luxury fortress stops looking like an isolated architectural fluke. It starts looking like a terrifying structural symptom of an entire generation of hypergrowth. The university radar study did not just flag one elite address. It exposed a prestigious guest list of marquee luxury neighbors across the coastal economic zone. The Jinma Waterfront Mansion, the China Vanke Horizon, the Poly Riviera Residences, and the ultra-exclusive Emerald Emperor high-rise. Most of these structures sat squarely in that exact same dangerous trajectory, moving downward anywhere from 20 millimeters to well over 80 millimeters. But separate municipal building investigations across China's Tier 1 megacities have tracked individual high-rises on reclaimed land that have settled anywhere from N to 35 centimeters since their structural frames were topped out. Visual. Text bolded, on screen, 35 cm of subsidence. Footage of an engineering level, showing an unmistakable slope. That is an engineering deviation that scales far beyond anything the early geological forecasting models factored in. And it carries immediate, severe structural consequences for the high-pressure utility pipes, electrical conduits, and heavy foundation joints buried deep inside their subterranean cores. Roughly 70% of the newer luxury developments at the north end of the reclaimed bay show measurable, ongoing sinking. This isn't a single bad contractor using substandard rebar. This is an entire coastline of glass and steel, doing exactly what the geological history of the Pearl River Delta warned it would do. Visual. Graphic comparing reclaimed soil behavior in Shenzhen Bay to the mudflats of Shanghai Pudong and the reclaimed coal mining zones of Tianjin. To truly comprehend the scale of this structural crisis, you have to realize that China's engineering boom has been waging a non-stop, multi-decade war against soft soil. Take a look at Shanghai's Pudong district. Back in 2012, during the construction of the 632-meter Shanghai Tower, the entire nation watched in shock as massive, multi-meter cracks began snaking through the pavement right outside the construction zone. The sheer weight of the excavation and the aggressive pumping of groundwater caused the surrounding soft, water-saturated river clay to shift. The municipal authorities had to pump emergency liquid grout deep into the earth to stabilize the neighborhood before the world's second-tallest building could even open its doors. Or look further north to the megaport of Tianjin, where massive residential blocks built over reclaimed mudflats and deep alluvial plains have seen entire streets buckle, separating from the main tower steps because the public sidewalks sank at twice the speed of the heavily piled high rises. Visual. The graphic levels, the Delta Trap, Shenzhen vs Shanghai vs Guangzhou. The mechanics of the Imperial Lotus Design Tower failure tied directly into this broader national pattern. When you construct towers on river deltas and reclaimed ocean fronts, you are building on land that is still geologically alive. The soil hasn't finished settling from its own natural formation over thousands of years. Yet structural engineers are forcing it to bear hundreds of thousands of tons of static load instantly. If you find this kind of forensic breakdown worth your time, the deep dive into the slow-motion failures that developers successfully hide from the public until the physical structural cracks finally show up in the marble. Consider hitting that subscribe button right now. This channel takes apart one massive, hyper-expensive engineering mega project at a time. We look directly at the real engineering data, the hidden financial maneuvers, and the high-level municipal design decisions that nobody wants to put their signature on. There is a massive archive of these hidden structural disasters coming up, and you do not want to miss what we have uncovered next. Visual. Sound effect. Dramatic whoosh. Timeline transition to the year 2021, a dark night in southern China. Now the geological forces underneath the Imperial Lotus Tower are simply doing what physics dictates they must do. Soil under extreme pressure will always compact. The far more uncomfortable, far more damning part of the story is what the executive boards and regulatory bureaus in charge of public safety did, or completely failed to do, once they had every scientific reason to pay close attention. Go back to 2021. In the neighboring coastal province, a 30-story commercial and residential high-rise began to violently, inexplicably sway in the middle of the afternoon. Thousands of terrified office workers and residents streamed out into the streets, filming the top of the tower as it whipped back and forth against a clear blue sky. The building didn't collapse, thank goodness, but it was a massive high-profile wake-up call that played out across millions of smartphone screens nationwide. In direct response to that near disaster and several high-profile residential failures, the Ministry of Housing and Urban-Rural Development issued sweeping new structural safety directives. They imposed rigid height limits on new skyscrapers, mandated comprehensive milestone inspections for aging towers, and legally forced local property management committees to establish deep, untouchable financial reserves so that the cash would actually be sitting in a bank account to repair structural defects before they transformed into a national tragedy. Visual. An animated calendar ticks rapidly from 2017 forward to 2042, but under the current framework implemented by the regional municipal housing bureaus, the safety net contains a gaping multi-decade loophole. For premium residential buildings constructed within close proximity to the saltwater coastline, the very first mandatory, independent structural milestone inspection doesn't come due until the tower officially turns 25 years old. Let's do the basic arithmetic together. The Imperial Lotus Design Tower was fully completed and occupied in the year 2017. Run those numbers forward, and its very first legally mandated, state-enforced structural and foundation review will not arrive until the year 2042. That is an astonishing 25-year regulatory blind spot, a quarter of a century window in which no comprehensive, periodic, state-mandated structural subsurface review has to happen at all. The billionaire buyers can park their supercars 60 stories in the air for the next 2 decades without a single official inspector checking to see if the main foundation mat is warping under their wheels. And the regulatory gap gets even wider from there. Visual. Screenshots of official housing bureau codes with the words subsidence and sat radar not. Neither the National Building Quality Codes nor the updated local municipal construction updates contain a single binding clause that requires ongoing post-occupancy ground subsidence monitoring or satellite INSAR tracking. Think about the gravity of that statement. The university study that utilized space-grade radar to measure this luxury tower sinking faster than almost anything else on the southern coastline. Legally, it triggers absolutely nothing. No official structural inspection gets automatically scheduled. No public safety warning gets issued to the homeowners. No formal design review is open against Longhao Real Estate Group. The highly precise satellite data exists in peer-reviewed scientific journals, but the administrative system simply isn't required to look at it, let alone act upon it. That regulatory void runs straight into the high-stakes legal question of what wealthy buyers are actually told when they hand over their millions. Under national consumer and property laws, a developer or a secondary seller is strictly required to disclose known hidden defects that materially affect a property's market value and are completely invisible to the naked eye. Things like an unpermitted structural modification or active underg, round flooding, but there is currently zero legal precedent on whether millimeter-scale satellite radar data counts as a material structural defect that a seller is legally obligated to share during a transaction. Visual. Text flays. The silent disclosure gap. So, when the explosive news of the university subsidence study finally leaked out into luxury real estate forums, prospective buyers and even current multi-millionaire residents reported learning about the sinking status of their building from independent journalists and scientific blogs, not from their own property management board. The precise structural data was sitting safely inside an academic library, while the individuals with 200 million yuan parked 60 stories above the ocean found out that their building was sinking the exact same way you and I did. By reading about it online, Legal commentators inside China's top design institutes have already flagged the massive legal liability buried deep within this information gap. A developer or a high-end broker who possesses documented knowledge of localized ground instability and quietly downplays it to close a luxury sale can still be held liable for corporate fraud and material misrepresentation under the Civil Code, regardless of whether satellite data is explicitly written into the local building ordinances. The data does not need to be written into a municipal statute to end up as a devastating piece of evidence in a regional court of law, to be completely fair and objective. The structural engineers and university researchers are not shouting that the building is on the verge of an imminent collapse. This structural data must not be twisted into a sensationalized headline about a tower falling over tomorrow. The university team went out of their way to emphasize that a certain degree of initial structural settlement is completely normal for any megastructure built on Delta Silt, and they have not classified any single building on the list as an active danger to human life. The Sunny Isles District Construction Bureau pointed out, entirely accurately, that the building's blueprints met every single parameter of the China National Building Code when the foundation was poured. But the scientists also did absolutely nothing to soften or sugarcoat their raw findings. They explicitly called the ongoing, unstabilized downward movement a profound wake-up call for the entire real estate sector. Structural engineers interviewed by national media outlets landed in the exact same unsettling spot. The massive safety factors built into these ultra-luxury steel skeletons mean they are probably fine for the immediate future. The real anxiety is the long-term horizon. We are talking about decades of continuous, uneven, differential settlement quietly racking up internal structural fatigue, twisting plumbing lines, and driving up building-wide maintenance costs on a coastline that is simultaneously facing rising sea levels and intense typhoons. You would certainly hope that this multi-billion yuan lesson was thoroughly digested by the industry before anyone mixes the concrete for the next megatower on the strip. It wasn't scene end. Scene start, narrator voice, dramatic, investigative, visceral, and human, visual, cut to X, look inside the Imperial Lotus Design Tower. Glitzy high-definition marketing clips slowly transition into grainy, handheld smartphone footage filmed by residents. Xini Wang face appears on screen, followed by archival footage of water gushing from the walls of a basement. Parking deck narrator. To the corporate boardrooms of Longhao Real Estate Group, 80 millimeters of ground subsidence is just a tiny, acceptable rounding error on a structural engineering spreadsheet. But when you live 60 stories in the air, structural engineering isn't an abstract math problem. It is the only thing keeping your world from twisting itself to pieces. And for the people who actually bought into the dream of the Imperial Lotus Design Tower, the cracks in the brochure are starting to manifest as a terrifying, hyper-expensive reality. Let's talk about Mr. Wang Xiaoken, a self-made logistics tech entrepreneur who spent a staggering 140 million yuan in 2019 to secure a sprawling, 4-bedroom duplex penthouse on the 48th floor. For Wang, the selling point wasn't just the panoramic view of the Shenzhen coastline. It was the sheer prestige of the Lotus Vader. He could drive his rare, customized carbon fiber supercar directly into the automated cradle at the base of the tower, watch the robotic arms lock onto his tires, and the smooth acceleration as the high-speed elevator shot up to his floor, parking his vehicle directly behind a triple-paned glass wall in his own sky lounge. Visual text flays on screen. The penthouse nightmare. For the first 18 months, life was exactly what the marketing promised. A seamless, high-tech paradise. But by late 2022, Wang began noticing a series of bizarre, subtle anomalies inside his multi-million yuan sanctuary. It started with the doors. The massive, floor-to-ceiling solid oak doors leading to his primary suite began to stick. At first, he assumed it was just seasonal humidity, causing the wood to swell, a common enough issue in southern China. He called his private interior designer, who sent a carpenter to shave down the edges, but 6 months later, the doors were sticking again. This time, the warp was worse. Then came the sounds. In the absolute dead of night, when the coastal winds died down, and the city traffic below fell silent, Wang would sit in his living room and hear deep, metallic groans telegraphing through the building's core, sharp, echoing clacks that sounded like heavy cables snapping under extreme tension. He tried to brush it off as the tower naturally flexing against the wind. He didn't realize that his penthouse wasn't just flexing. It was tilting, visual animation showing the rotation of a high-rise floor slab by a fraction of a degree. Inducing, bending, stress on glass curtain wall residences. Because the Imperial Lotus Design Tower is suffering from differential settlement, where the subterranean friction piles under the eastern quadrant are compressing into the porous limestone faster than the piles under the western quadrant. The building is undergoing a slow-motion, torsional twist. At the 48th floor, that microscopic deviation at the foundation level scales up dramatically. The horizontal floor slabs are no longer perfectly level. They are resting at a fraction of a degree of incline. To the naked eye, a 0.5-degree floor slope is almost invisible. But to a 100-kilogram sheet of structural, Italian-imported glass curtain wall, it is a death sentence. In the spring of 2024, Wang was hosting a private dinner for several business associates. Midway through the main course, a violent, deafening crack shattered the atmosphere. One of the massive, floor-to-ceiling structural glass panes lining his outdoor sky terrace had spontaneously exploded, spraying thousands of crystallized fragments into his private plunge pool. The differential stress had pinched the structural steel window frame tightly against the glass until the pressure exceeded the material's structural threshold. The glass didn't break because of an impact. It broke because the building's shifting frame literally crushed it. Visual, recklessly shaking footage of an emergency water pipeline rupture in a basement residence. High-pressure water blasting through concrete. Wang's nightmare is far from an isolated incident. 2 floors below him, Miss Li Na, a prominent venture capitalist, woke up at 3 in the morning to the sound of rushing water. The high-pressure main wastewater riser running vertically through her kitchen column had abruptly sheared in 2. When the local plumbing engineers cut open the reinforced drywall to investigate the failure, they were horrified by what they found. The heavy copper pipeline hadn't corroded. Instead, the vertical concrete structural column next to it had settled just enough to put an immense downward shearing load on the rigid pipe. The building's structural frame was literally cutting its own internal utility systems like a pair of slow-motion scissors. Li's luxury kitchen was completely ruined under 3 inches of gray wastewater, causing an estimated 4.5 million yuan in immediate property damage to her custom silk wallpapers and imported stone cabinetry. But the financial damage to her apartment interior paled in comparison to the sudden icy wave of panic that swept through the building's exclusive WeChat group chat. Visual screens of text message chats between residents with anxiety intensifying. For months, the property management firm, a high-end subsidiary controlled directly by Longhao Real Estate Group, had been systematically gaslighting the homeowners committee. They claimed that the sticking doors were simple aesthetic issues, that the exploding terrace glass was due to unseasonably high thermal expansion, and that the strange creaking sounds in the night were just the building's standard structural dampers settling into place. But when the university satellite INSAR radar study leaked into public view, the illusion collapsed instantly. The homeowners realized that their multi-million yuan investments were literally sinking into the delta mud at a rate of nearly 1 centimeter per year, with no stabilization in sight. The panic boiled over into an emergency, closed-door meeting of the Imperial Lotus Homeowners Committee. The tension in the room was electric. These weren't typical, working-class citizens who could be easily intimidated by corporate security or local bureaucratic stalling. These were individuals with immense economic clout, corporate lawyers on retainer, and direct lines to regional municipal officials. Yet, they found themselves completely trapped by the brutal reality of real estate economics. Visual diagram showing the escalating costs of grouting vs. the annual reserve budget of a luxury condo association. The building's property management board revealed that to address the differential settlement and stop the slow-motion twisting of the tower, Structural engineers would need to perform an incredibly complex, high-pressure chemical grouting operation. This requires drilling hundreds of micro-apertures straight through that historic 8,400 cubic meter concrete mat foundation and pumping millions of liters of specialized, ultra-dense structural polyurethane resin deep into the porous limestone cavities below to artificially reinforce the collapsing sand layers. The initial cost estimate for this emergency foundation stabilization? A mind-boggling 180 million yuan. And, because the developer, Longhao Real Estate Group, had already legally handed over the building's operation to the Homeowners Association years prior, their corporate legal department issued a cold, formal statement asserting that the structural warranty period for initial foundation settlement had already expired under their standard contract terms. The multi-million-dollar bill was slated to be dropped entirely onto the shoulders of the Condo Association through a massive, unprecedented, special structural assessment. Every single unit owner was suddenly facing an immediate, mandatory out-of-pocket invoice of over 1.3 million yuan just to fund the emergency stabilization of the mud beneath their feet. Visual, high-contrast bold text on screen. Duo bars the loss. The economic fallout was immediate and devastating to the building's market profile. Within 48 hours of the special assessment notice leaking to premium real estate brokerages in Hong Kong and Shanghai, 3 separate penthouse listings inside the Imperial Lotus Design Tower were abruptly withdrawn from the market. Prospective ultra-high net worth buyers, who had been actively touring the building, vanished overnight. Who in their right mind would pay 200 million yuan for a Skybridge penthouse when they knew they were inheriting a structurally twisting building with a leaking foundation and a multi-million yuan ongoing legal dispute? Property values inside the tower plummeted by an estimated 35% in a single quarter, wiping out over 2 billion yuan in collective paper wealth for the building's elite owners. Wang Xiaoqian found himself standing on his unlevel terrace, looking out over the glittering lights of Shenzhen Bay, realizing that his ultimate symbol of architectural luxury had transformed into a beautiful, gilded financial trap. He could not sell the duplex without disclosing the active foundation settlement litigation, and he could not live in it without the lingering low-frequency dread that the structural strains would continue to distort his home, one broken pipe and one cracked glass pane at a time. The grand spectacle of driving his hypercar into the sky had been completely overshadowed by the unglamorous, unyielding reality of the collapsing Deltica soil below. Scene start narrator voice, grave, prophetic, phenol energy visual. Wide, sweeping night shot of the waterfront district from a drone. The skyline looks majestic, but the graphic satellite radar overlay thirds, painting the entire reel. Estate strip in anxious red and orange heat map, dots narrator. When you zoom out from the cracked marble slabs and strained glass panels of the Imperial Lotus Design Tower, the true scope of this engineering disaster becomes clear. This was never a story about one bad address or one unlucky group of billionaires. The Imperial Lotus Tower is not an outlier. It is a terrifying structural warning shot for an entire coastline. The landmark university radar study proved that the delta soil is doing exactly what delta soil has done for millions of years. It shifts, it compacts, and it bends under immense weight. The more uncomfortable question, the one that regional housing bureaus and corporate real estate boards are desperately trying to suppress, is what happens next as the massive bill for this hypergrowth cycle finally lands. Visual. Satellite image zooming in on a new real estate conflation. Point just 1 kilometer down the road. Text flashes. The sequel. Tangshan River Royal Residences. Because if you thought this geological crisis would force developers to halt and rethink their blueprints, you don't understand the relentless momentum of high-end real estate financing. Right now, on the exact same strip of reclaimed mudflats, over the exact same waterlogged sponge of porous limestone, the very same developer is pouring the foundation for an even bigger sequel, introducing the Tangshan River Royal Residences. Going up just down the avenue from the Imperial Lotus Tower, this brand new mega project is slated to become the tallest waterfront residential structure in the entire country. soaring to a dizzying 380 meters into the sky. It will feature over 200 ultra-luxury units, powered by 4 massive next-generation robotic car elevators running straight through its central structural spine. The developer, Longhao Group, has already spent a staggering 70 million yuan just on the hypermodern sales center alone. Visual footage of a massive truck convoy streaming into a construction pit. Floodlights illuminating a sea of freshly poured, wet concrete, and in late 2025, the project completed one of the largest residential foundation pours in modern history, dumping more than 15,000 cubic meters of high-density concrete into a colossal excavation pit over a single, non-stop 48-hour weekend. It is a foundation mat significantly thicker and heavier than the one under the Imperial Lotus Tower. It represents a projected total sellout value of 9.5 billion yuan. The developer has been completely candid in luxury investor meetings, bragging that wealthy buyers understand the car garage in the sky concept much better now, precisely because the Imperial Lotus Tower proved the elite demand exists. But they are building on the exact same sand. They are stacking an even heavier concrete mountain on top of the exact same unstable, shifting strata. And the keys are due to change hands within the next 24 months, right as the long-term structural subsidence bill from the last building cycle is officially coming due. Which leaves the one critical question that nobody in the real estate industry or the municipal bureaus wants to answer. Who is actually going to pay for this? Visual graphic animation showing the subsidence. Radial wave experimental spread from a central mega tower point out to 320 meters. Geotechnical researchers from top engineering institutes in Guangzhou and Wuhan have recently published a stark warning. This specific type of deep pile high-rise subsidence doesn't just happen inside a vacuum. The localized downward drawdown of soil can reach out as far as 320 meters beyond a building's own structural footprint. That means a brand new mega tower like the Tangshan River Royal Residences doesn't just settle into its own footprint. As its immense weight drives those friction piles down, it literally creates a subterranean gravity cone, tugging at the soil, the utility lines, and the foundations of every older, smaller neighboring high-rise surrounding it. The buildings are actively fighting each other for stability underground. If you think insurance policies will step in to save the day, think again. Standard structural insurance frameworks across the region are designed to cover sudden, catastrophic events, like a violent typhoon ripping off a curtain wall or a catastrophic sinkhole swallowing a street overnight. But slow, silent, millimeter-by-millimeter soil subsidence that quietly warps heavy plumbing risers, fractures basement retaining walls, and cracks penthouse window frames over a 20-year horizon. That falls squarely into a legal gray zone that insurance conglomerates routinely reject. Visual, dramatic jump cuts showing glossy, perfect marketing brochures flipping in the wind, tricking down into extreme close-ups of bare concrete Asian joints coated in stratified groundwater slime. Meanwhile, the updated urban safety directives continue to push more and more financial accountability for structural health and reserve funding directly onto the building homeowners' committees, while remaining completely silent on who covers the multi-million yuan remediation bills when the structural failure isn't caused by bad construction materials, but by the very ground the city chose to develop. The true existential crisis facing these coastal districts was never whether the Imperial Lotus Design Tower is safe to sleep in tonight. It almost certainly is. The structural engineering margins designed by China's elite design institutes are incredibly robust, packed with redundant steel reinforcement to prevent sudden failure. The real crisis is what the next 40 years look like. It is the slow, grinding reality of a skyline built on a sponge. It is the reality of a multi-billion yuan wall of luxury glass towers moving down a few millimeters at a time, year after year. While the internal strains multiply, the structural maintenance bills grow exponentially, and the property values slowly bleed away. And when that ultimate geological bill finally comes due, it will not land on the executive board of Longhao Group, who sold out the tower for 6 billion yuan and moved down the avenue to launch the next glittering development project. it will land squarely on the people who bought into the dream. Long after the golden brochures have faded, and long after the luxury sales centers have been completely torn away in the hyper-paced markets of our modern coastal cities, the marketing spectacle always arrives first. The ground simply tells the truth later. Visual. The Shenzhen skyline fades to absolute black. A single text line appears. The ground never lies. Channels sign-off graphic appears, outro music to black.